Hi there, welcome to the E-commerce Nurse podcast, our 22nd episode. I'm Karina McLeod, ex-Amazonian and CEO and founder of E-commerce Nurse and Vendor Society. Today we're going to be talking about the importance of building a content strategy when it comes to investing in social media. We have a special guest, Emma Smith, the CEO and founder of Los Social, a social media agency based in the UK and a partner agency of E-commerce Nurse. Emma has over 18 years of experience creating and devising social and digital content strategies for some of the world's biggest brands during her time at global platforms and publishers, including Yahoo and AOL. So hi, Emma, big thank you for coming on the show today. Super excited to talk to you about content strategy, given your years of experience.
Yes, thank you for having me, Karina. It's a pleasure. I'll give you a bit of a background into what I do. So as you said, I've worked in content strategy for around 18 years now. And I started off working in television, then moved into radio and then into digital advertising and marketing. And I've had the same role pretty much through my entire career, which is creating content strategies and marketing plans for brands so that they've got a better way of connecting with their audience. And when I set up Los Social 2 years ago, that's exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to work with business owners to ensure that they were connecting with the most relevant customers by creating great content.
Awesome. Thank you. That's fantastic. And for those that are listening and those that are listening, actually start thinking. And when we have these conversations with businesses that are on social media, start thinking, oh, content strategy, social media. Well, we actually don't have often a strategy. We're just on social media. And the more that we speak with brands, that we do find that. And when you ask them, well, why are you on social media? What's your strategy? What's your overall objective? Often the cases are just winging it, really, in terms of not really understanding. So let's start off and talk about really why brands should have social media at the top of their priority list when it comes to devising a marketing plan.
Yes, so I mean, I come across this quite often, actually, working with lots of different customers in different fields. When people start a business or they've got a great product, the temptation is to kind of get it out there straight away and get it in front of customers. And obviously that's absolutely right, because you want to see if it's going to work initially. What then happens is that if it scales quite quickly and it's very popular, there is a temptation to jump on different social media platforms just so that you can build that initial brand awareness, when actually what you really need to be doing at that point is thinking about who are the people that are buying your product, and then using the knowledge about them, tailor a content strategy so that you can then scale to that specific audience. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if you've created a product that you know is going to appeal to young mums, they're the people that are buying it. You can see that from your sales cycle. Then you need to start thinking about how you can then scale up the amount of new mums that are actually seeing your product, and look at the social platforms that might be most relevant. So if it's a really visual product and it's really beautifully packaged, then Instagram's a great platform for that. Mm-hmm. If your product's more aimed at small business owners, for example, then you might want to think about a LinkedIn strategy. Mm-hmm. So it's as important to think about where the content's going to sit as it is what the content actually is, if that makes sense. It's all about an overarching strategy.
Yeah, completely. And I guess that's an interesting point about platform and different platforms, because you do see it where businesses just go and, okay, I'm just going to go on every platform. And you almost see there's a duplicate. The content is being mirrored. So you've got the same content on Instagram, same on Facebook. And we've even done this in the past. And then done the same on LinkedIn. But actually, as you say, the platform's different depending on who you're going after. So what would you say are the key platforms out there today to when it comes to social media?
I get it. I mean, it really depends. I mean, social media is an investment of time as well as money if you're going to obviously scale up and pay for ads. Thinking about the right platforms for you is really important, and also how much time you've actually got to then create content for them. Mm-hmm. So it might be that if you've got a very visual product, you think about the visual platforms. Instagram obviously is a very visual platform, so is Facebook. If you then have got time or the budget to actually get a bit more creative and do video content and have a bit of fun with your brand, then obviously TikTok's absolutely huge. Instagram have responded to TikTok by creating the Reels product. So again, a lot of it is thinking about how much time you've actually got to commit, and also what content you've got at your disposal already. So if you've got a product that's very beautifully packaged, as I said, you might already have quite a lot of visual content to utilize. If you can afford to do a photo shoot and get some fantastic imagery, why not try and get a bit of video content as well to branch out? Instagram is very key in terms of visuals, but Facebook actually works particularly well if people are trying to drive a community. So if your product taps into a specific community, going back to the sort of young mums example, you can really nurture and engage your audience in an environment like Facebook. So there might be a bit of visual, but then you might have to invest a bit more time in thinking about the language that you use. But I mean, everything, when I'm talking to brands, and I'm sure you've heard me talk about this before, is everything should start from that overarching strategy. So you really need to think about what your values are as a brand, the tone of voice that you want to have on with your customers when you're connecting with them, and that will form part of your brand identity. Alongside that, we then do a bit of work thinking about your audience and your ideal customer, which is the kind of modern way of talking about it. So who are the people that you really want to reach? Who are the people that are already buying your product, and how do you find more of them? And then you align your values with what they want, the content that they want, and then you create a content strategy off the back of that. And then that will enable you to, as you then select the platforms, ensure that you've got consistency. So the type of content might be slightly different, but where it comes from should have that consistent message throughout. And that, again, should appear on your website, all of your social media platforms, and in your Amazon store as well. So there's that real consistent messaging, because that's really where brand awareness sort of works on its own. You start getting engagement. Obviously, depending on the price of a product, people might take several different engagements with it to actually make that purchase. So if there's that consistency, you're going to look more professional, more polished, and like you really understand your audience.
And that's a really interesting point. And that's also what we find, what we do when it comes to helping sellers and vendors on Amazon as well, is understanding what their overarching brand strategy is and their tone, because that needs to, as you say, that filters down, and it needs to filter down. Otherwise, it ends up where we've seen this with some brands where they've got one message going on their website, one message on Amazon, a completely different message on social media. And that's, as you say, probably they don't actually have a real overarching strategy and really defined that. And so it's quite mixed and confusing, I guess, for the customer of really understanding it. And I guess that comes in with followers. Some businesses just get really excited. Oh, we've got this amount of followers on Instagram. We've got this amount of people that have liked our page on Facebook and so forth. But, you know, I guess it comes down to quality, because actually quantity is fantastic. And I guess it looks great. But if that's not quality and not really your target audience, then I guess that number doesn't really help you as a business.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that's what people are starting to realise now. I mean, having worked at the industry when Facebook began to be very popular, initially that it was all vanity metrics. So brands just wanted the big numbers. They wanted that. Sometimes an advertising campaign was basically primarily to increase the amount of Facebook likes a brand had, which at the time kind of served a purpose. It helped them build up that audience on social media. But now I think brands are much more savvy, and it is more about engagement. What is difficult, and I'll go back to the Facebook and Instagram, is that their algorithm makes it incredibly difficult to have a long-term engagement strategy, because they change it all the time. Most recently, they've changed it a couple of times. And I think, I mean, I've spoken to probably about 20 different small businesses recently, all of whom have had a big dip in their engagement. So it can be, you don't want to wedge yourself too closely to it, because it can be quite distracting, demotivating. But yeah, the quality of the engagements is absolutely key. Getting people to comment increases your chance of being discoverable organically on both platforms. But there's a couple of new ways of measuring now. So there's been a lot of talk about likes being taken away from Instagram, for example, mainly due to the fact that people were becoming quite obsessed with that number, and especially a lot of young people as well that aren't even in business. So now what with a lot of video content, you'll see views, which is a better metric, because even if people are scrolling and they see your piece of content for a second or two, that is likely to still have an impact. But also saves on Instagram is quite big at the moment, and that is what people are being encouraged to think about, creating content that people actually want to save and then come back to later on. And it's a much deeper engagement at that level, because you know that people are genuinely going to re-engage with you later on, and then thinking about what the content you're producing should look like with that engagement in mind, rather than just pushing out post after post, really thinking about what that message is and what that branded piece of content is actually doing.
That's really interesting that Instagram, it's almost like they're moving with the metrics, as you say, moving away from that and creating more engagement. And when it comes to engagement, I mean, how do you as a brand, what level of engagement, or how should you engage with those, you know, people that are commenting, people are sending messages, and sometimes you do get some random messages in there, don't you? And some irrelevant, or people trying to piggyback, I guess, off of that. How much should brands really respond to their audience?
Well, I mean, the big brands obviously generally have community management teams, so they'll make sure that they're very reactive to comments that they get and messages. As you say, if it looks like bot behavior, the best thing to do is just ignore it, because that's not really going to help you in any way. But if people are genuinely excited about your brand, they're commenting on it, it's great to engage with them. It doesn't mean to need to get into a lengthy conversation, but acknowledging that you appreciate their engagement is a great tool. On Twitter, for example, I think Twitter over the years has become a bit of a customer service platform. So a lot of people don't generally use it a lot to actually tweet unless they're complaining about something, which is a good and a bad thing. And it depends. If you have a big customer service angle where you're sending products out, or there might be issues with a product that people want to get in touch with you about, it can be a really great tool. I always recommend that if people are contacting you on Twitter, you respond visibly so that people can see you're having a really positive interaction, and then you take that conversation offline. It can fuel a fire if you get into a conversation with customers and there's a frustration on either end. But it is a great way to get in touch with brands quickly. Obviously, from a consumer point of view, they know they're going to get a reaction if they do it quite publicly. But yeah, having that positive outlook is very important to make sure that your wider community understand that you've got good customer service. And then Facebook as well, actually. You can really engage communities in Facebook. And a lot of people have got Facebook groups for specific groups of customers or product types. And again, that is a great way of keeping that engagement going and actually then utilising that engagement. So you might then ask your customers what they think about specific products, or do some A/B testing with different groups of customers. So including them in a journey is actually really beneficial.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess that goes on to my next question, which is, how really should brands be using social media? Because of course you've mentioned a customer service element and complaining. I've even had that where friends are like, well, do it on Twitter. And I'm like, no, I don't want to make it public. But some people do. And then there's this brand awareness. So is there a right or wrong way to use social media?
I think you always need to think about what you're trying to achieve. So as a brand awareness tool, everything you put out should be in line with your brand identity, with your visual identity. It should reflect the tone that you want to emit. If that then attracts people that are getting in touch because of customer service reasons, then that's great, because they're probably the right people. I wouldn't necessarily use it too politically. So I think that can be quite off-putting. So some brands have actually done a fantastic job, especially in the States, of sort of jumping on the election bandwagon and things like that, but keeping it quite tongue-in-cheek. So I think it can be a fine line, and a lot of the time, as much as you know about your audience's behaviour, you don't know a lot about their politics. So it can be a bit dicey to engage with too much of that type of conversation. I think positivity, and it can be quite difficult because everybody has sort of positive and negative feelings about different things. I think as a brand, professionalism and positivity kind of go hand in hand, so that's quite important. But yeah, I mean, it really goes back to that kind of overarching strategy and knowing what you're trying to achieve, knowing who your audience is, and behaving in a way that you think is appropriate to them. And that can mean being quite honest and open and real. And that's quite a big theme for a lot of brands, is we don't want to come across as perfect as individuals, and actually brands can do the same. And I think, in fact, that's quite an interesting thought around a lot of sustainable and green products. I think initially when people hear people talking about vegan and sustainable living and all that kind of stuff, it can be a bit intimidating if you haven't started living your life that way. So what a lot of brands are doing now is encouraging people to make very small changes to their lifestyle that are achievable, so that they don't feel like they're being overly preachy, but they're enabling people to sort of engage with them, but in a really positive and supportive way. So yeah, I mean, my approach, and the thing is with any kind of social media and content strategy, it is quite subjective. I don't necessarily think anyone is an expert in this field, because everybody's got their own opinions on how to do things. But I think not shaming your ideal customer is a great start. Being positive, understanding them, understanding what they need, what's going to make their life easier, and don't necessarily push your product in their face all the time. Think about how that product is going to benefit their life, and that's actually could be your starting point for your content.
Yeah, and that's an interesting that you mentioned that, because that was going to be another question that came to me, and we're often sort of considering as a team is, how do you drive sales off of social media? Because obviously many of businesses, they're building this community and this element of engagement, but a lot of businesses' ultimate goal is to actually generate those sales. But I guess going in, as you say, we've seen it where businesses go in for the hard sale, and that's just doesn't work when it comes to social media.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And I think that's kind of where I always start, is how are you presenting your product to your potential customer? Do you make a beautiful piece of artwork? Don't just show them that piece of artwork, show them it in someone's home and how wonderful it enhances something that they've already got. If you've got a nutritional product, talk about the positive effects it's going to have on their health, rather than talking about that product, especially if it's something that people might not necessarily understand. So I've worked with a health food brand who had various ingredients in different products, including xylitol and cinnamon and lots of different things that have got very specific health benefits. But as a product, you're just selling something that tastes nice. So what we did, we stripped everything back, and we produced content that was about each specific thing that went into that product, and what that could actually do long term to benefit your health, how it could change the way your body worked, improve your digestion. And we actually ended up with a few months worth of content based on ingredients. And again, going back to that kind of not being supportive and not shaming your audience, we were going for people that were into fitness and trying to be healthy, but also people that wanted that as a goal. So we were giving people really achievable tips on how they could increase their fitness and well-being without radically changing their lives. So it's giving people almost a bit of a carrot, and enticing them in with things that aren't going to intimidate them or overwhelm them. And then your product is the thing that delivers that ultimately. So it isn't social media. If you try and sell too hard, that's when people will click unfollow, and that's when they're not likely to engage. But if they feel like they're learning something, or they're going to benefit long term by engaging with your brand, that's a great way to draw them in. It's not a really quick sales funnel, so you would need to do a bit of job building that up, but eventually you will get very loyal customers off the back of it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I, even as a user on like Instagram, when I see that and I see the hard sale, or even with influencers, and then you just see it's almost like a stuck record. And one thing where you saw them as quite an inspirational role model, it then changes when they're just going in, and you can see that they're just going and pushing a brand in, you know, a product in, but in a very salesy way that you end up unfollowing or you've disengaged. And I think that's important for brands to know that, because, and some brands we speak with don't completely understand that. And they're like, oh yeah, well, we tried social media, but it didn't give us any, we spent X amount of time on it, but we didn't get the results and we decided not to bother. Because I think at the start, I think there's two things. The start, their expectation is wrong, as you say. It's a slower funnel, and it's not just about that quick, hard sale. And of course, a lot of the time, they don't have a brand strategy in the first place. And so they're not really quite sure what their overall objective is in any case.
Yeah, and I get that a lot actually when people have tried, and quite often they've probably spoken to various different agencies or marketing people for support, and because it's subjective, people have given them lots of different views. So their overall grid or their Facebook profile looks a bit messy because they've tried lots of different approaches without choosing one and committing to it and really trying to drive it. It's it is hard, and it is when people haven't worked in that industry before. And I come from an advertising background, so I've got quite a nice mix of the commercial and the editorial. So I understand how they kind of complement each other. But if people are from one side or the other, it can be quite difficult to make that clear, how that is a longer term commitment.
Yeah, definitely. And when it comes, we talked about engagement as being quite an important metric for anyone that is looking at social media. What is the best way, away from sales, what's the best way where they really can measure success, or whether they're basically on the right path when it comes to investing their time in social media?
It does, again, it depends. For some, it still is follows, but the quality of the followers. So I've been working with a client recently who are in the climbing industry, and they had a very clear goal of the amount of followers that they wanted after a specific amount of time, but that wasn't at the detriment of the quality of them. So they didn't want people, we weren't going to do any kind of synthetic loop, like and follow or anything like that. It was very much, we want to get in with these people that are in this community and encourage them to converse with other people in that community and follow us. So it's really organic, but it's really powerful because the people that are there are absolutely going to support this business. It can be followers, it can be the number of engagements on a post. As I said, saves is quite a good measure. And there's also a new format in Instagram called Guides, which enables you to almost create a kind of PDF, but that lives in Instagram, where it's kind of a step-by-step and you can collate information and put it together. So that's another really nice way of, if people are engaging with that kind of content, it's a deeper engagement. But then you can also measure on profile visits, so people that have actually gone to look for more content on your platform, or people that have clicked off to your website or to the URL that you've got on your profile, which again could be your Amazon store or a product. So again, I think setting those objectives at the beginning is really important, and that should be part of that content strategy development. So if you know that you need to get people to your website, you won't create content that's just very fluffy. So it will have more of it will tease them, and then you'll encourage them to go to the website for more information or a longer form article or more information on a product. But it's difficult to say because obviously it's very dependent on what that business is.
Yeah, depends on the goal, definitely. And I think you mentioned there, sort of in terms of with a current client that you're working with, the organic aspect. This is another question we often get asked, is about the organic versus paid, because I think that it gets a bit muddy when people think of social media. They automatically think, oh, paid media. Or last time I did something on Facebook, it cost me X, or last time I did this, it cost me Y. But actually there's the organic aspect, which actually I would say comes first, right? Before you even invest in paid, if you aren't focusing on the content strategy, which sort of feeds in the organic aspect, then, should you be investing in paid without that?
Not really. that's where you're going to get the best audience fits from. So if you've already got a really engaged organic audience, and it doesn't have to be ginormous, but it needs to be substantial, then the algorithm is going to be able to pick up on who the most likely customers are and create clusters of audiences based on that information. If you create a Facebook profile and you have 10 followers and you then try and target, you will have some success, but it's going to cost you probably a bit more money. And also you need the ability with any kind of Facebook and Instagram advertising to test. So there needs to be at least a couple of weeks at the beginning of the campaign where you look at what's happening with the different ad copy and you really test it depending on the audiences. So I would always recommend having that real organic audience built up first. And obviously they can take into account your Facebook your website visitors as well. And that gives you a really good sort of existing persona to base some of your targeting off. But I'd 100% go to set up an established organic profile that people are going to recognize. A lot of the targeting you're going to do is retargeting your existing followers as well. So if you know they've engaged with your website or with your one of your Facebook social media profiles, it's really important to have that joined up approach before you then start advertising to masses.
Yeah, definitely. And that sort of goes even with what we do as a business. We're always focusing on the organic aspect first, because if you throw loads of money at something and you haven't even sort of mastered sort of the the content side of things and how the product should be looking, then you're throwing money at something that you haven't even sort of mastered and figured out first off, which is really, really vital. So that makes complete sense. And I guess the challenge with social media is the fact that it's so real time, that today's news is then yesterday's news, and things just you've got to be on it. It's like constant, isn't it? And it's this you can't just sort of forget about it. And you see that, don't you? Businesses are posted and it's like a post from a month ago. It's just so crazy, the amount of content that you need to pour into it.
And again, I mean, it that can be off-putting. You don't need to post 5 times a day. You just need to have that consistency to begin with. So even if you only want to post a couple of times a week, your audience will come to expect that. So something that happens quite a lot is when people first go on a platform or they set up a profile, they'll follow lots of brands as well as people that they are interested in. And then if that person doesn't post for a month, when they're having a look through who they follow, they're going to unfollow people that aren't posting, because to have that number of people that you're following is quite a vanity thing for an individual as well. So it's really important from a brand's point of view that they keep a consistent, and it doesn't need to be, you don't want to bombard, you don't want to become too spammy. You create a content schedule that's quite realistic for you as a business, but also is going to appeal to your target audience. So that's a really good consideration, actually.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's it with brands, is that that you see it sometimes as a bit of an overkill, and actually for me it's getting that balance, isn't it? Because I know that when there's people constantly, it just gets a bit tiring, that it's a bit too much. It's trying to find, I guess, the balance in line with your overarching strategy, and that's why it is so important to have that strategy before you go into it. And with it being so dynamic and real time, I guess it's like keeping up with it. You've mentioned so many new features happening in Instagram, and I guess that it's just constantly changing, isn't it? These platforms adding new features, taking away new old features.
Yeah, exactly. And that's very much why I don't really believe that anybody's an expert in it, because it does change so frequently. And also what's really key for one person, so reels might work really well for one business who are really fun and cool and know how to create that sort of content. But for somebody else, it could be a bit cringy if they decided to try and jump on TikTok. Like you've really got to balance up what's right for your brand, where you think your audience are, and if you can keep up with that type of content. Yeah, there's new features all the time. LinkedIn have obviously now introduced stories. I think everybody's now got stories, which from a consumer point of view, a lot of the feedback I'm seeing is that people don't want a story on every platform. So they're easy to not engage with if you're not interested in that type of thing, but they can be a great tool. I mean, I use stories a lot to keep present on Instagram and Facebook, but I don't know how much I would actually use them from a professional point of view on LinkedIn. But yeah, there's so many amazing features now, and LinkedIn have just introduced a few more. There seems to be a bit of a wave actually at the back end of this year, so people are obviously hoping that everybody's really going to embrace them going into January. But it is a tricky thing to keep on top of, and that's why it's quite important to work with people that can give you a little bit of guidance and not necessarily always manage that content for you, but be sort of bounce ideas off, give you bits of inspiration and show you what other brands are doing actually, which is always a good inspiration.
Yeah, definitely. And just being in the know, because actually that's what we find is that, working with Amazon, it's just constant change. And actually for a business to have someone that's constantly being updated with those changes or the social media changes and everything that's going on, it just becomes, it's almost a day job. And when you're a business where you're dealing with multiple clients, you're seeing so much happening anyway. So you're constantly soaking up what's going on, all the new features, what's worked for someone they could then adopt and work for another, which definitely helps. So great, that's fantastic. And thank you so much, Emma, for sharing your insights and your expertise on this topic. That's been awesome. And I always ask one last question to our guests is, if you were to give a tip to someone or a business that's just about to start out on social media, what would it be?
Well, it's going to sound very repetitive, but I'm going to say have a strategy. So just make sure, and when you say strategy, it can sometimes sound a bit overwhelming and like it's going to be a lot of work. But actually, if you know your business, all it can take is sitting down with a notepad and thinking about what you want to stand for as a business. What's your mission? What do you want the end product to look like? How you want to engage with customers, and what do you want to be irreverent? Do you want to be funny? Do you want to be serious or professional? And then who that ideal customer is. And there might be one or two different ideal customers. And then underpinning that will be your strategy. So it might be a sentence that just states exactly how you want to engage. So I want to create content for new mums that's going to make their lives easier. And then from that, you can think about the platforms you want to be on, the content that you would want to create, and then how you then bring that content strategy to life.
Awesome. Great. You've been awesome. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And hopefully those that have been listening today, for those that are new to social media, hopefully it's given you some ideas of how you can start working in social media and building that strategy. And for those that are working on social media already and probably don't have a clear strategy in place, now's the time to get a notepad and pen and start marking out what that actually is. So thank you everyone for listening. And thanks once again, Emma.
Thank you.